America's working class has been cheated. That is an assertion.
Open border coordinate. That's a Koch brothers proposal.
And the Democrats jumped right on board with the corporatists. They got in bed with Wall Street, military-industrial complex, the fossil fuels, Silicon Valley. And now look what happened to the country. We have the biggest income disparity since the Gilded Age. Bigger than that. There's more.
Expanded trade has thrown the working class into much more competition than they experienced before trade with lower wage countries took off.
Can say is that as a country, we have to make a different set of choices because the choices we've made have hurt working people.
Congressman, because I wouldn't know what to tell you to write. I don't know what to do about the depression and the inflation and the Russians and the crime in the street. All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.
Hello, and welcome to another Institute for Sound Public Policy podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Lynn, and today is May 30th, 2023. And I have the distinct pleasure to be joined by John Michael Greer. Now, I'm going to read right off your bio here, John. It's huge, and this is really, this, as you know, this is really sparing. And if you want to fill in some more features, please do. But John, you are a widely respected author. I know I've read several of your books. You're a blogger in fields ranging from nature, spirituality, to the future of industrial society. You're the author of more than 70 books, including 16 novels, and you blog weekly at echosophia.net, and you live in Rhode Island with your wife, Sara. John Michael Greer, JMG, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, it's great to have you here, John. It's funny. A few weeks ago, actually it was a month ago, a fellow by the name of Chuck Moran, who runs an organization called Strong Towns, and I think you're familiar with them. John.
Oh yeah.
They do really yeoman's work in looking at an urban landscape and looking at it in terms of profitability, loss. And he was in town giving a lecture. And in answer to one of my questions, I was kind of shocked with his answer, because he said, you look at a city like Lancaster, where I'm living, we have about 60,000 people. We're a small city relative to many others. And he said, it wouldn't, and he loves the city. He loves the bones. We have a lot of old architecture in here. There's a lot of great walkability. But he said something that really surprised me. And what he said was, it wouldn't surprise me that if I came back here in 20 years, Lancaster was desolate. Or it wouldn't surprise me if Lancaster was thriving. Because he said it all comes down to leadership and social cohesion. And as I was writing my weekly newsletter, I wanted to talk about that. And that at that time, your Echo Sophia newsletter came to me, and it was titled "Stumbling Through the Fog," and you were talking on the topic, the notion of enchantment, disenchantment, in particular, quoting folks like Max Weber. And to me, in several respects, you were talking about, it's one way to it's a facet in a way of social cohesion. And that, John, is what I'd really like to talk to you about today and see how enchantment fits in. And is there a place for enchantment in this modern industrial world?
Such as it is, yes. Well, I want to begin here by talking a little about this notion that we live in a disenchanted world. That's ever since Max Weber published The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism at the end of the 19th century. It's been a standard talking point that we live in a disenchanted world. We live in a world where nobody actually believes in magic and miracles and deities and spirits and all this kind of stuff. We're all, practical and pragmatic and realistic, except, of course, most of us aren't. A few years ago, a man named Jason Josephson Storm wrote a fascinating book called The Myth of Disenchantment, where he pointed out the obvious thing, which is that most people in the industrial world, most people even in the Western industrial countries, don't qualify as disenchanted. They don't actually believe in this rigid mechanical universe proclaimed so loudly by Max Weber, etc. No, I mean, the one example that I like to use that kind of shows, look at the number of people right now who are employed in astronomy, in scientific astronomy, and compare it to the number of people who are employed full-time in astrology. Many, many more people are employed as astrologers than as astronomers. The astronomers are desperately scrambling for grant money to try to keep their observatories open. The astrologers have waiting lists for their services, and more people coming in all the time. The same is true across the board. We don't actually live in a disenchanted world. We live in a world where an enormous number of people practice magic, follow religions, worship gods, deal with spirits, check the omens and the stars all the time. This is normal. This is human normal. Our species has been doing this for a very long time. Now, it is, of course, very standard when this comes up. Of course, it does now and again. For, on the one hand, you have the true believers in progress, the great God progress who will save us all, going, that's okay, sooner or later we'll all achieve this glorious utopia of progress where everyone will agree with me. Or, with the person who's speaking, rather. And nobody will believe in any of this stuff. It's a Star Trek notion that, eventually we'll get rid of all that stuff. Or then you get the people who are saying, well, yes, but the people who matter know better. I'm recalling J.P. Morgan. Yes, that J.P. Morgan was asked about the fact that he consulted with Evangeline. I'm losing her last name. She was one of the great astrologers of the very very late 19th, early 20th centuries. I'll remember the name when I don't need it anymore. But at any rate, he was asked, well, why do you hang out with an astrologer? Why do you ask an astrologer about about investments? And Morgan looked at the reporter and said, millionaires don't believe in astrology, but billionaires do, and then turned and walked away. We do not live in an enchanted world. We live in a world where a minority of influential, privileged people insist that we are disenchanted, insist that what they insist, in effect, is that theirs is the only power that exists, that theirs is the only power that matters. Power over political systems, over economic systems, power over money, power over technology. That's the only power they want to talk about. And the fact that there are other sources of power and influence in the world, that there are powers that are unique to the individual, that there are powers that each of us can tap into in and of ourselves, that is their darkest dream. That is the nightmare that haunts them. The people might look at the technology and they might look at all the other, all this other fancy crap and say, okay, big deal. The things that interest me are something other. That's, the things that interest me are enchantment. That's what terrifies them. And that's why we get the endless dreary propaganda insisting that we live in a disenchanted world, and how can you be so silly as to follow the evidence of your senses instead of believing what we tell you is true? Who are you going to believe, me or your lying eyes?
Interesting. So, John, as I'd mentioned earlier, and you've been here to where I live in Lancaster, the city of Lancaster and the county of Lancaster. We have the largest Amish population. Now, how would you view them? There was a Professor Hofsteller who referred to them as being a high context culture versus a low context culture. Would you view them as, how does all that work in terms of enchantment, social cohesion?
Well, let's start with the most straightforward example. The Pennsylvania Dutch communities, of which the Amish are very much a part, have very robust, rich magical traditions. They practice brachere. They practice hexere. They have this whole world of folk magic that is a part of everyday life. They live in an enchanted world. They also live in a world in which Jesus Christ is a constant presence. And so is the devil. They live in a world that that is full of supernatural presences. So yes, they live in an enchanted world. And they take active roles in participating in that world. That's where you've got the hex signs on the barns. You've got all the other, everyday stuff that is part of the Pennsylvania Deutsch world. That is part of that is a way of connecting human beings with enchantment. Now, they also have. I'm not perfectly sure of what the scholar in question means by a high context rather than a low context culture.
It was something to the effect of where, you don't have, in a high context culture, you don't need a lot of written material. You don't need a lot of laws. It's understood. You see, like you said earlier, you see with your lying eyes what's going on. You feel things. Whereas a low context, it's a lot of for instance, a lot of newcomers to a city that need laws, regulations, need to be told where to go.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah.
How to relate.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there's an overlap in understanding that framing of the words. There's some overlap between enchantment and the intensity of context, because enchantment is one of the things I doubt very many people certainly sit down and learn all of these various folk magic things that are part of Pennsylvania Deutsch life. You pick them up growing up. You may actually study with a Braucher to learn how to do that particular kind of magical folk healing. You may study with a Hexenmeister. But most people never do. Most people just pick it up as they go along. So it's got that high context, that sort of contextual way of education. Many of us don't have that advantage in dealing with the world. We have to make use of written texts because that's what's available. Most of us didn't grow up in societies in which magic was being practiced that openly, and we might have been lucky to have a grandmother or a great uncle or something like that who could clue us in, but maybe not. In which case, you do what you can. But social cohesion is a complex issue. Certainly, one of the things that enchantment can do is to very strongly foster that. If you are part of a world in which this stuff is practiced, you're part of a world in which you watch the omens, you watch the stars, you plant by the moon, you put Himmelsbrief in the house when you move in to keep it from catching on fire, and so on. That's making you part of a community, part of a society of nods and winks, a society of communication that doesn't have to be explicit. But on the other hand, of course, such things can also turn into major sources of social disruption. Think about witch hunts.
Right.
If somebody accuses someone else of casting nasty magic on them, you can tear a community apart that way. So, I'm very interested, though, in the lecturer's claim thought that Lancaster could be completely deserted in 20 years. I think he's wrong. And I think he's wrong because you have too much good farmland.
Well, we do. We certainly,
Exactly.
it's the largest contiguous farm acreage in the country that doesn't need to be irrigated. Exactly. You've got this immense agricultural breadbasket right there. And so no matter what happens, if the United States is conquered by the Chinese or something, there are going to be people living in Lancaster. They may not be you. They may have renamed it, but there's going to be a community there because there are aspects of community that are a function of human action. There are aspects of community that are a function of nature, that are a function of where is there a good spot for a town? Where is the good farmland? Where do the communication routes run? Where are the harbors, and so on and so forth. So leadership helps. Leadership can also, or leadership can be completely useless, and things can get by just very well anyway. I think political leadership tends to be overrated, but certainly social cohesion, a willingness to work together, a willingness not to start shooting your neighbors or something like that, that can do a lot of good. But you also have to have certain advantages. It does not matter how much good leadership and social cohesion Las Vegas has, for example. Las Vegas is going away. They're running out of water. The recent huge rains in the Sierras have postponed doomsday, but they haven't brought it to an end.
And so, and it won't. We're in a drying cycle over the next several centuries. Las Vegas is going to get to the point that it can no longer provide people with water. I don't care how much social cohesion they've got. People are going to have to leave. And 500 years from now, explorers will go through the great American desert to discover the ruins of vanished Las Vegas. And look at these amazing, the remnants of these amazing structures rising out of the sand and going, wow, I wonder what gods they built these temples to.
Well, I mean, we do that with the Maya, don't we?
Exactly. It's exactly the same sort of thing. And and in a very real sense, we did build Las Vegas. Mammon is a deity, right?
Yeah. I watched that movie Bugsy, which he's the one who created the Flamingo, I think it was, casino.
That's Bugsy Siegel. Yeah.
Yeah, Bugsy Siegel. Yeah, and it was a small, tiny desert town.
Exactly, and this is actually there's a high context community for you, the mafia.
Yes,
they've got their traditions, they've got their unspoken rules, they've got their principle of omerta. They're a distinct community among us, and a group of privately held family corporations. How very American.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think what Chuck Moran was getting at. And I wrote about this in my newsletter a few weeks ago. There was a professor in 2007, Robert Putnam, and he was a professor of public policy at Harvard, and he published a paper called E Pluribus Unum, Diversity and Community in the 21st Century. And they interviewed like 30-some thousand people across the US, and it was pretty rigorous, the controls that they used. And the idea was they wanted to better understand how is diversity helping or hurting? Well, basically, they just wanted how diversity affects what he called social capital. And what they found was it doesn't. The more culturally, economically diverse a community is, the less there tends to be social cohesion, or what he called social capital. And I think that might be what Moran might have been getting at, because they seem to be hell bent on pushing as many refugees as they can through the Church World Services.
Of course. I mean, they've got they're at this point, especially when working people are being able to get improved wages because because they can, when Starbucks is unionizing, they're desperate to drive down wages by bringing in lots of people who will work for cheap. That's all that's behind all this moaning about refugees, by the way. The people who are bringing it in have they are not motivated by compassion. They just want to drive down wages.
Absolutely. I believe that, John. And a lot of my career after I left the private world has been trying to wake people up to that notion. Because it ultimately is supply and demand, but beyond that, because when you talk about like enchantment, there's culture, that context, that ability to relate to each other. I think when you take that away, don't you also take away? Don't we become like more disenchanted? Don't we have to rely on government as opposed to each other? And
well, I would distinguish that from enchantment, because, of course, I'm not using the term enchantment in a kind of abstract, general, metaphoric sense. But you're certainly right that one of the purposes of in fact, a lot of everything that's been going on since the creation of the suburbs is to break up social networks, break up family networks, break up the various other things that allow people to organize themselves and to make things happen in their own communities, so that government can hire more college graduates. I mean, to some extent, you've got to think of this whole thing since the GI Bill, since the mass expansion of the university system. It's this endless sort of process to produce more and more layers of middle management. If you look at the kind of administrations that ran large school systems in 1920, how many administrators they had? They didn't, basically, and what they have now. Very clearly, what's been going on is a full employment program for college grads who may not be able to make it in any other context, and so it's just this padding the bureaucratic class And there's a lot of factors that feed into that. Partly, if you're a bureaucrat, your status depends on how many people you have under you, how many direct reports you have.
Correct.
Okay, and so you want to expand that, whether there's any actual reason to do it or not. Your status, we're primates, we're baboons, basically. Okay, and status is everything to us. Being able to grunt a little louder and get groomed by the other baboons instead of having to groom them, that's life and death for most primates. It's life and death for human beings. So people want that status. They want that bureaucratic status. They want this vast pyramid of turtles underneath them. You remember the old Dr. Seuss story, Yertle the Turtle?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have this process, this self accelerating process of manufacturing useless bureaucratic make work, so that we can hire as many people as possible and eventually push off all the manufacturing jobs into third world countries, so that we can just keep on expanding our bureaucracy. And now eventually that falls to the ground.
I was going to say there has to be an end game to that isn't pleasant.
Yeah, no, it's very simply, again, it's the Yertle the Turtle effect. Sooner or later, the turtles low down in the stack get tired of being squashed and leave, and then the whole thing comes rattling down. One of the unwanted side effects of the whole COVID business earlier is precisely that a bunch of turtles were told, okay, go home, stay home. We don't care if you don't have jobs. We don't care if you can't pay the rent. Just go home and stay home because we're panicking about this virus. And a lot of them went home and stayed home and figured out they could make a living just fine outside of employment. And so turtles are leaving that stack at a pretty fair pace now. And the system is cracking.
Right, because there seems to be this strange push-pull out there. There is this ever-declining workforce participation rate. At the same time, we have employers looking for people. They'll hire anyone that's trainable, that is employment ready, and yet there doesn't. And I know people could go back to work, but don't.
No,
like you said,
they don't.
They're involved in other things.
It's not worth their while, because the thing is, employers these days, far too many employers, they say, well, this is the amount of profit I want to make, and that's got to go every year. And the employees, well, they'll have to be satisfied with whatever pittance we give them, and the employees aren't doing it, and the employers are baffled. What do you mean we have to give them what do you mean we have to pay them a fair rate? What do you mean we have to change our work policies so that, for their convenience? We shouldn't have to bargain with these people. They're peasants. We should tell them what we want, and they should, scurry around, doing the Yazamaza routine and giving it to us. And then they're completely baffled, because these peasants, these machines that are designed to make them cash, are just going, sorry, screw that, and walking away and you getting jobs under the table, or otherwise finding other ways to get by. The whole vast tottering structure of American corporate bureaucratic life is starting to break down. And I expect to see it breaking down to a much greater extent in the years and decades immediately ahead. It's going to be a wild ride.
Interesting. I know years ago, I forget the book of yours, John, but you had mentioned this notion of catabolic failure.
Catabolic collapse.
Catabolic collapse.
Yes.
Do you think that things are, because basically, as I understood it, this year was a little worse than last year, and next year will be a little worse than this one. Do you see that speeding up?
Oh, yes.
These days?
No, this is complex, because we're talking about averages. When we say this year is a little worse, this year is a little better, that's an average. Some things improve, some things get worse. What's happening, and has been happening for many years now, is that every year, for most Americans, more things get worse than get better. And sometimes a whole bunch of things get worse in a hurry, and sometimes a number of things get better. But on average, the line is trending downwards. And that's something that our ideologies cannot deal with. There's that mythology of progress again, this faith that we've got to be going onward and upward. Everything should be getting better. We'll gimmick the numbers until it looks like everything's getting better. It's not getting better. And it won't. Not for a very, very long time. This is called decline. This is the nature of our lives in America today. And anyone who's honest with themselves and looks at what's actually around them, unless they live inside the airtight bubbles that are inhabited by the very well-to-do, everyone knows it. And
go ahead.
Nobody wants to talk about it. No, so go ahead. Go ahead.
Maybe this gets us back on to social cohesion, because as this decline takes shape and we go into the abyss, don't you think communities that have as Putnam said, a higher social capital, or as I like to say, higher levels of social cohesion, will survive better?
It depends very much on the community and on how that social cohesion is created and maintained. One of the problems is this label social cohesion can refer to a lot of things. It can very often nowadays it's used to refer to top-down cohesion. The people do what we tell them to. I see. That doesn't work. That doesn't hack it anymore. The social cohesion that matters is grassroots social cohesion. It's what is built up by people in the course of their everyday lives. And a culture, a location, a town that has a lot of that grassroots interaction, a lot of that grassroots cohesion, yes, they will tend to do better. But that's not something you can impose. That's not something that government can do anything about. Quite the contrary. When government does it, they're always trying to get people to behave, and it never works. I mean, you want social cohesion in the inner cities, you've got it. It's called a street gang. They've got enormous social cohesion. They've got a high context culture. You don't go to classes to learn how to run with a gang. And in fact, what you see in those gangs is the eventual genesis of the government, of the kind of simple governmental structures of a post-collapse society. When many years ago, science fiction writer Cyril Kornbluth, try that again, wrote a book called The Syndic, in which he imagined the United States falling completely to pieces, and the one force available to hold it together was the mafia. And so they ended up running. The mafia ended up as the government. They ended up running things. Okay, we're still gonna take taxes, gotcha, but we're gonna call it protection money from now on. Got it? So, in a certain, now of course this is Kornbluth. He was a brilliant satirist. That much of his science fiction is wicked satire, and this is an example. But he's got a point. Groups with social cohesion will tend to end up outcompeting. Grassroots, high-context social cohesion will end up outcompeting many of the others. And certainly when you have governments like most of those in the United States today, and I include municipal, state, what have you, many of those exist solely as a mechanism for the people who are influential people to profiteer off tax money. We don't have to talk about details, but you know perfectly well when they're spending vast amounts of money for this or that, or donating all this money to that, a lot of that money is coming back into somebody's pockets. Cough, cough, 10% for the big guy. Cough, cough, we don't have to say anymore. American society is riddled with that kind of graft. It always has been. And it's crucial that we remember that kind of social cohesion does not last.
Right.
My great if I interject, my great concern here is that talk about social cohesion may be used by scam artists to sell government on some vast new set of intrusive programs that have manufactured social cohesion in our country, which will be a complete waste of everyone's time and will probably be very intrusive and destructive to liberty. And I watch the way we screw things up in this country, as we do, of course, and say, oh, we don't want to go there. So go on.
Is that screwing up things? Is that a facet of decline? We see unsuccessful military ventures, incompetence at so many different levels of government.
This is something Arnold Toynbee, who was one of the great scholars of decline and fall, in his book, A Study of History, late on in volume 6 and 7 and 8, he talks a lot about how societies trip over their own feet and faceplant. And his model is very simple. In a successful society, you have the leadership class, we can call them, what he would call the creative minority. Okay, they are constantly being replenished by people from lower down the social pyramid, and all that matters is you can get the job done.
Meritocracy,
Okay?
in other words.
Yeah, but the problem is that term meritocracy gets abused. We'll talk about that in a moment. But
I'd love to.
but it's more specifically, you're always coming up with new responses to new social problems. Okay, this crisis arrives. How are we going to deal with it? You find somebody who can deal with it, and they end up in the top of the leadership. And you rinse and repeat, and each crisis brings new people to the forefront. The last time that happened in the United States was 1932. When you had the 32 election, you had FDR and the New Dealers. They had effective responses to the crisis of the Great Depression. They couldn't make it go away, but they actually had something that would do something instead of, the old guard just sitting there going, "Oh, we must wait until it fixes itself." Didn't
Right,
work.
because what wasn't it like? We're a capitalist society. It'll fix
exactly.
itself. And, right.
Yeah, and it didn't, and it wasn't going to, and there were a lot of problems with FDR solutions. There are no solutions that don't. Every solution generates more problems. But since then, that same class, that same brain trust, college educated, quote meritocratic unquote, managerial class has remained glued in place long after it passed its point of senility, long after it stopped coming up with new responses to problems, and is doing what, again, Toynbee talked about, when a creative minority turns into a dominant minority, and they stop caring about fixing problems. What matters is maintaining their own grip on power. That's what we've had, of course, in the United States for many decades now. All that matters is the existing, the current claque of senile kleptocrats in the Senate are a great example. None of them has had a new idea since 1958. And I know many of them weren't born yet in 1958. My point stands. All they're doing is rehashing a set of failed prescriptions that didn't work and won't work, and this country is falling to bits because nobody's willing to say, okay, how do we actually fix this? What is broken? What do we fix? What do we need to get rid of? And you can't say that at this point. And so that's why we have this vast mountain of incompetence and failure that's dragging the country down. Go ahead.
You wrote a book, The King in Orange, which was about Trump's 2016 campaign. Do you think Trump was as close as we came to someone who was prepared to fix things? I looked at him in this, I read Burkhart's book, The Renaissance, and he had talked about how these strong men would rise up and become dictators in different Italian cities. And because they weren't, quote unquote, legitimate, they weren't of the blood, they actually had to do stuff. And I couldn't help but think that Trump, for our corporatocracy, he was not legitimate, but he wanted to show the people, I can fix things.
Trump was the first of a wave. And he was not very successful. Of course, the existing system fought him tooth and nail, try that again. And he has his limitations. But Trump is less important than the popular movement that put him into office. And that movement is still out there. It's still finding people. It's about half taken over the Republican Party at this point. It is in the process of showing some signs of making a run at the Democrats. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is kind of right now out there campaigning for the Democratic nomination, and he is very much a creature of the same type. He's trying to trump the Democrats, and he might succeed. We don't know yet. It's very early on, and he's getting about the kind of polling that Trump was at the equivalent point in 2015.
And I should tell our audience, John, that you should be taken seriously, because I believe it was January 2016 when you predicted in one of your blogs, I think you were still doing the Arch Druid report.
That was our Druid report. And yes, I predicted that Donald Trump would win. That was January 20th, 2016. I've had occasion to remember that. And yeah, I was saying, look, come on. Sure, he might still lose, but I think he has a much higher chance of winning than anybody realizes, not because of any virtues he has or any vices, but the fact that he's the only person who's talking about making significant change at a time when this country desperately needs major changes, and nobody in power is willing to make them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, in fact, this is what typically happens. One of the virtues of democracy is that it makes it possible for newcomers, people from outside, to elbow their way in and make changes without having to have like civil wars and things like that. Civil wars are a mess. We should avoid them. But FDR was an example in his time. Abraham Lincoln was an example in his time. Andrew Jackson was another. You have these figures, these frankly demagogues, who rise up and become the magnet for the aspirations of the people at a time when the existing order is refusing to change and change is desperately needed. We certainly have not seen the last of Donald Trump, but there are about a dozen other figures right now who are in similar arcs. We have Glenn Youngkin taking the governorship of Virginia, coming out of nowhere to do that, and slapping aside a very deeply entrenched political machine to do it. We have Ron DeSantis, of course, down in Florida. We have Greg Abbott in Texas. There are others. There are a range of people who are basically recognizing that the situation is ripe for change, and it's purely a matter of which of these various figures happens to get have the right combination of luck and talent to ride the next wave of change into the White House and into control of the country.
When you say luck, John, are you thinking more luck in terms of timing? So like Lao Tzu said, in action, watch the timing. Could they be a little early? Could they be a little late? Or is it just something slips up in the machine and they're able to take advantage?
It's all of the above. One of the useful things about a label like luck is that it allows you to incorporate in that all of the various unpredictable factors that come into play, including enchantment. Hillary Clinton, in her disastrously failed presidential campaign in 2016, she had everything lined up except enchantment. It was the most disenchanted campaign I think I've ever seen. All these slogans churned out, all these "I'm with her," all this. Never notice that she's with me. It's all we're supposed to get her the thing that she wants, and it went over incredibly badly. She spent all of this money, but nobody actually seems to have thought, okay, we need to offer people something to make them vote for us. We need to give them some reason to think their lives will be a little better under Hillary Clinton presidency than under anybody else. And Clinton's team never even tried to do that. It's like what was it? Her 2008 when she her first big run where she was going, I am so ready to lead. Okay. Yes, but why should we want you? And the fact that never occurred to her, and it never occurs to most politicians at this point, that they're actually it's as though they're trying to get someone to go out on a date to them, and they've forgotten they have to, offer something that will induce the person to go on a date.
Can that be summed up easily, John, to the word entitlement? They feel entitled at this point?
Yeah. Actually, that's a very good point. Yes, there's a huge amount of entitlement. And here's one of those moments, the sudden realization. Entitlement is the opposite of enchantment. Okay? In a situation of enchantment, you are participating in the magic of the moment. In a situation of entitlement, you're sitting back and expecting the moment to come and hand itself to you.
Interesting.
These are not the same things. And so our disenchanted and profoundly entitled kleptocratic ruling class is sitting there going, I am, okay, I'm ready. Come on, peasants, I'm ready for you to grovel at my feet and give me everything I want. And then they get all baffled because the peasants are just going, sorry, Charlie, and walking off and going to a Trump rally or something. It's really quite amusing to watch, although I imagine for them it's very traumatic because they've been raised to believe they're the good people, they're the smart people, they're the people who are entitled to lead. And fewer and fewer people want to follow them, largely because their leadership has been an unbroken succession of disasters.
Yes. And also,
of course,
don't you think that the machine exists to get them into office? So if they, pay their dues at one level, they'll get elevated to the next and the next.
Failing upwards. One of the things that separates, back to Arnold Toynbee here, one of the great things that separates a creative minority from a dominant minority is that a dominant minority, there are no penalties for failure. Now look at America's politicians and America's corporate flacks, and you see the same thing. The corporate stooges who made the dumb mistakes that have cost Anheuser-Busch and Target, what was it, almost $30 billion at this point in stock value? Their careers will not suffer. They may go to a different job.
John? I'm scratching my head looking at this. You think
because
go ahead.
Yeah, because it's all you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. It's all a club. And the mere fact that you've caused this complete disaster, well, that's fine, but they're part of the club. We move them to a different position. But if you do, once you have that entrenched in society, and you always do get that. You always do get that sooner or later. Once you have that entrenched, you are guaranteed nothing but one embarrassing failure after another. That's what gave us Afghanistan. That's what's giving us, and what will probably turn out to be an equally humiliating mess in the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. And it's what is causing these shareholders in Anheuser-Busch and Target to go, oh, every time they look at they look at what's happened to their portfolio's value, and the list goes on. One cataclysmic failure after another, caused by the fact that there are no penalties for failure. Now, ultimately, there is a penalty for failure because if you continue running a society that way, your society collapses, and then your job drops out from under you, and there you are, wondering what happened as somebody else takes over. But until then, it's very comforting to know that once you go to the right college, you get hired in the right firms, you express all the right opinions, you babble all the right words, and you're going to be fine. You're going to be wealthy. You're going to have the things you want. You're going to be able to take those vacations and wear those clothes, and you don't have to worry about the mere fact that your incompetence is actually helping to drag down the society you're running. It's one of those things.
It's amazing to me, John, that it just perpetuates itself, and it's been this way for 40 years, and we don't seem to have been able to wean this out. I guess that's because you spoke of this dominant minority that is unresponsive because they have the power. Now, you were talking in 2016 once about how people get the power back. You talked of things like magic to get the power back. And you mentioned magic earlier, which could you define what magic is? Because I know it's something that go, please.
Okay. There are various definitions. The one I use is the one that was introduced by Dion Fortune. That was her nom de pentagram. Her actual name was Violet Firth. She was the most influential theoretician and practitioner of magic in 20th century English-speaking world. And she defined magic as the art and science of causing change in consciousness in accordance with will.
So is it, when you talked about Tonabee, it's almost like I had these visions of Oswald Spengler, because he seemed to look at it the same way. He called it technique, because it wasn't a thing, but a living activity that we all participate in. Part of our gestalt.
Insofar as technique is applied to causing changes in consciousness, it becomes a form of magic. My favorite example here is, of course, advertising, which is a kind of debased evil magic. You look at an advertisement for, let's use the current kicking, whipping boy of the time, Bud Light. Okay, here's an advertisement for Bud Light. Now you and I know that Bud Light tastes like stale butt sweat. Okay, it's not palatable stuff, but you have all of these advertisements out there showing Bud Light, and here's these attractive, obviously well-to-do people having a great time tipping back Bud Light. That's intended to cast a spell on you, to make you think, not consciously, but down deep, down in the subconscious, that if you just tip back Bud Light, you will be as happy and as prosperous and as handsome as the people in the ad. And you won't. We all know that. You're just, making money for Anheuser-Busch and drinking something that tastes like stale butt sweat. But that's the magic, you see. That's the evil magic. They've got a spell on you. Now, it so happens
that place, that frame of mind, that
exactly, they're creating that they're causing a change in consciousness that leads you to mistake drinking Bud Light for a way to become, healthy and happy and rich and so on and so forth. And so that's an example of evil magic. And it's an example of evil magic directed by big corporations at the masses to try to control their behavior. In this case, to keep them buying this stale butt sweat. And so the alternative, and the alternative, of course, that I've been teaching for many, many years to those who are interested in, is that you can take control of that process yourself. You can say, no, I see what you're doing there. That's garbage. I'm not going to drink that stuff. And then you go do something else. You decide how you're going to change your consciousness. You decide how you're going to direct your energies and actions. You become autonomous. This is why magic is feared and despised in our society, because magic is the power of the individual.
John, do you think the dominant minority, when they can no longer cast their spells, change our consciousness, is that when they resort to violence and oppression?
They've been resorting to violence and oppression for years now. There's a lot of violence and a lot of oppression going on these days. No, the problem is, you see, is that when they cast these spells, they cast them on themselves too. And so they believe, that's the great problem with the dominant minority. They end up believing their own shtick. And that's why every dominant minority eventually makes the mistakes, the cascade of mistakes that end up destroying themselves. Ours is well on its way. We have, one of the most likely issues is that we have a society right now that only works because the Fed can keep on, in effect, printing money at a breakneck rate, borrowing incredible amounts of money from nobody, pushing out all of these unpayable IOUs. That's the only thing that keeps the United States functioning right now, is basically running up that colossal, unimaginable unpayable debt. We're having this big fuss about raising the debt ceiling again. Come on. We can't afford to do that indefinitely, because that only works because we've got a global economic system in place that allows us to dump vast amounts of dollar-denominated assets onto the rest of the world, and they take them to facilitate the global economy. Well, now that's falling to bits. Now we have Russia and China and Iran, and you fill in the blank, making arrangements to do all their business in their own currencies or in other non-dollar currencies. Demand for the dollar is starting to weaken. It's going to keep weakening. And as that happens, our ability to keep on spinning the presses and coming up with gargantuan amounts of money is going to go away. When that happens, this country is going to go to bits. And we're going to go through a wrenching process of reorganization, and the idiots in D.C. have no idea. It has never occurred to them that this complex, ramshackle collection of gimmicks that is propping up their power, that they're actually destroying it by their own actions.
How do you, to me, it's, and what I have trouble getting my head around, my hands around, is how they don't see this. Because when you look at post-World War II, our elites, they gave us the International Monetary Fund, Bretton Woods, all these institutions and structures that, enriched them, but at the same time did provide services. And we could look at and say, well, at least I'm better off this year than I was last year. I mean, none of that is going on. All we see is failure after failure, and they seem to come back into office again and again.
And the thing is, this is the kind of thing that happens. It happens over and over again. If you look at history, if you look at the last decades of any collapsed country, if you want to look at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, that's a good example, or the Russian Empire, or France, or pre-revolutionary France, Bourbon France. You have this same cascading pileup of failure for which there are no consequences until finally there are consequences. There's a saying down in Mexico that nothing happens until it happens. And so, which is, it's really a purpose. Things just go on and they go on. You think, well, it can't go on like this forever. Well, it won't actually, but it'll go on a very long time. And then eventually things snap and you have cascades of changes in a very quick time, very short amount of time, and woohoo, and then all of a sudden things settled into a new stability, which can be very, very different from the old one. When the Soviet Union broke apart, that's another example of the same thing.
Is this a good time to maybe talk about virtue then, John?
Yeah.
I think of, as you were talking about the fall of empires, I think of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and I keep a painting behind me here in the office. It's of Tadeusz Raton, who was a Lithuanian count that threw himself in front of the doors of the Stem, their version of a parliament, to keep them from leaving, because the nobles had all just voted on partitioning Poland and Lithuania away to their neighbors. And this was a country. I mean, at one point, the Polish winged Husaria, they were the finest household cavalry in Europe. They were amazingly strong. They withstood Cossack rebellions, Tatar invasions, Swedish invasions, Russian whooped up on the Russians for hundreds of years.
Yeah, hundreds of years, exactly.
Then go out with a whimper.
Exactly. The thing is, such societies usually do. Most nations go out with a whimper. It's rare for one to go out with a bang. If you read, again, the French Revolution or the Russian Revolution, either of the Russian revolutions is a great example. There's a certain amount of bang and clatter, but usually it just sort of slumps into collapse. And, all of a sudden the handful of dissidents who were pushing at it are left going, oh, crap, we have to run things now. And so they have to throw together a makeshift government in a hurry because the whole system has just ground to a halt around them. There is a very real possibility we could see similar scenes here in the United States within a decade. I don't know that it's going to happen that quickly, but we're very much reaching the point at which things are starting to crack right and left. And as you pointed out, there's no longer the expectation of improved conditions in a year. Everyone knows that next year is going to be worse than this year. Everyone knows that the policies being pushed by the government are going to continue to enrich politicians and corporate stooges and hurt everybody else. Everybody knows that the promises that are made to them are not going to be kept because they're not intended to be kept. They're slogans come up by advertising executives. And so as that spreads, all it takes is one crisis for when the government calls for everyone to pitch in and help save them, and people just shrug and walk away. And down it goes. That's usually what happens. That's when the Bourbon monarchy of France went down in 1792. Nobody in Paris, next to nobody anywhere in France rallied to their support. These people, this is a monarchy that had been in place for 1,000 years. They counted on the loyalty, but they'd done nothing to earn it for centuries. And so it wasn't there anymore.
In a democracy, you made me think of a book by a fellow named Sennett, The Fall of the Public Man. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but one of the
it's not a book I've read yet.
The most salient things I took from that is he's like, stop looking for a politician you can trust, makes you feel good, seems honorable, and find a politician who's afraid of you. Put him in office, threaten to take him out. And I look at someone like
That's good advice.
who, there was that point where there were these huge demonstrations going on. I mean, DC was full of anti-war protesters. And there was a point where he was speaking with Kissinger saying, "Oh my God, Henry, they could come over the gates and get us. How are we going to get out?" I mean, isn't that where we need our politicians to be right now, as opposed to finding some, unicorn out there that we're going to love and like? And
the thing, the problem with seeking the unicorn is that there are plenty of plausible scoundrels who will present themselves in that role. And if you're lucky, you might get an FDR. You might get an Abraham Lincoln. You might get an Adolf Hitler. Once you put your trust and loyalty into some shining figure who will lead the nation to bigger and better things, it's a total crapshoot. You have no way of knowing what you're going to get. Virtue, individual virtue, focusing on cleaning up your own act to start with, is crucial. And this is the thing. As the joke goes, we get the government we deserve. An enormous number of Americans, they're very much into the idea that politicians should follow the law, but they're not so much into doing it themselves. And the sense of entitlement that we see inside the Beltway and in corner offices mirrors the sense of entitlement we see in the streets. And so one of the first, and this is always one of the first things you have to do, is stop and say, okay, what have I become? What have I made of myself that contributes to the mess that we're in? Because that always has an answer, and it's a non-zero answer. And so it's by people stopping and cleaning up their own act and looking at the various blandishments being offered them, the various daydreams and fantasies, and all the encouragements to buy the stale butt sweat, whether that's actual canned fluid or whether it's the equivalent being offered by politicians. This is where causing change in consciousness in accordance with will, learning a little bit of ability to reflect, to think, to judge things based on some kind of moral compass. These things matter, and they matter politically, and they matter as well as mattering in terms of your own life.
Interesting. Is I'm thinking of, when you were speaking, thinking of terms you can't be bought. This there's that virtue. I recall my mother telling me this story. She was working the front counter of a local butcher shop. And every month the inspector would come in and do his thing, and then he'd put his report on the counter and walk off. And it was getting close to Thanksgiving, and the wife of the wife who owned the place offered him a turkey, and he said, "No, I can't take gratuities." And so when he went into the back to look at the operation, the owner told my mother, said, "Oh, go out, put it in his car." And my mother did. And he puts his report on the counter, goes and drives off. And about an hour later, he comes back, says nothing, has the turkey, puts it on the counter, turns around, walks out the door. And to me, that's just that level of virtue that, I'd mentioned Spengler's Man and Techniques. He talks of there's this remains of a Roman soldier in Pompeii who obviously never left his post because he wasn't properly relieved. And he said, that's a well-functioning society, where everyone feels this enfranchisement, to do, to be honorable, to, be that better man.
Yeah. But we have a society that, just do it is not just Nike's slogan. We had this, and this is actually something that you also see in history. In the late Roman Empire, emperors used to expel philosophers from Rome, expel them from the city because they were a subversive element, because they were talking about virtue. because they were teaching people to be virtuous and not just to, wallow in the bread and circuses and orgies and this kind of stuff. We have the same thing right now. Our televisions, our mass media, our internet are all yelling at us to just do it, just wallow in the excess, just go with the flow. And so to actually speak in terms of virtue, to speak in terms of taking conscious control of your life and making your judgments on some basis other than doing what you're told because you're being bribed to. That's subversive stuff. That's revolutionary stuff.
Is that also where religion can come in, John? I recall I have to admit, I really tried to get through a lot, Levy's book, The Doctrine and Ritual of High Magic. Your translation is great, but it's me. I ended up just listening on Audible to it on long walks. But he talked about how you have philosophy, which allows you to reason. You have science, which allows you to look at things objectively, but only religion allows you to have that conversation about good and evil. Is that where religiosity has a part in all this?
Well, it's certainly the most important way. It's the way that works for most people. There are other ways you can do it. And it is perfectly possible to get to morality from philosophy. Many people have done it. I mean, Aristotle was not especially a religious man, but the Nicomachean Ethics it's the most influential treatise on morality in the history of the Western world. But for most people, some kind of religion is a good way to tap into that, to find that strength, to find that ability to look at the world as something other than, a swamp of stuff. To find your way out of the swamp, to leave behind the cans of stale butt sweat, and to do something that matters with your life. Religion is the most widely effective way of doing that, and that could be any religion. As a member and occasional leader in and a very small minority religion, I get to meet a lot of people from a lot of different religious backgrounds, and various of them like to insist, well, we're the truly virtuous ones. But no, it really doesn't matter what religion it is. It really doesn't. I mean, I've talked to Christians and Jews and Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and various kinds of polytheists and practitioners of Vodun and even practitioners of Wicca and so on. And virtuous good people are good people. And religion of any religion can serve as a source of inner strength and insight that can help you to shove aside the pressures to conform to what we may as well call an evil society, and to do the right thing instead. And so that's kind of the challenge that we face. And again, it's not the only way to do it. There are other ways, but for a lot of people, it's a way that works.
Well, thanks so much for that, John. We're at a little over an hour now. As always, the time just flies when we're talking. In terms of, we looked at a lot of problems. What if there was a way through for the United States? And it doesn't matter how big a point plan that is. If, let's just say, you were elected to high office and you didn't have a deep state fighting you, what would you do?
Okay, the first thing I would do is recognize the United States is one country, but it's not one culture. The reason we have a federal republic is that most social issues belong in the hands of the state, not in the hands of the federal government. We could get rid of an enormous amount of the gridlock in Congress if we simply followed the Constitution and turned the issues that are not enumerated in the Constitution back to the states. You want to fight about abortion. You want to fight about who has the right to call themselves a woman. You want to fight about this or that. Go to it. That belongs in your state house, not in the federal government. The federal government is there to provide for the national defense, to regulate interstate trade, to negotiate with other nations, to carry out a few other specific constitutionally enumerated duties. Let's get it back to that. Once we've done that, then most of the pressures that are tearing this country apart will go away in a hurry. The other thing we're going to have to do is default on the national debt.
Mhm.
We've run up and beyond merely absurd, way off into preposterousness amount of debt that will never be paid. Everyone knows it will never be paid. And in the not too distant future, it's going to be impossible even to keep on paying interest on it as interest rates go up, as the dollar loses value, and so on. So all that we can do, countries default on their debt all the time. Russia defaulted in 1998. You notice it hasn't slowed them down yet. The United States will have to default on its debt. We can do it in a controlled fashion, and get out from under that burden. Impose a balanced budget amendment into the U.S. Constitution, so that we cannot spend more than we take in, and stop trying to be the global hegemon. We've done that. It didn't work we ran ourselves ragged. Let other countries fight over it for a while. We need to pull in our horns and pay attention to fixing the enormous backlog of problems we have here at home. And so those three things. I mean, there's plenty of other things that I could see that are worth doing, but those are the three things that I think really crucially need to be done if we're to survive as a nation.
Wow. Well, wonderful. I certainly appreciate that, John. And I know my listeners, your listeners, are going to certainly appreciate those insights as well. Now, John, how can people stay in touch with you?
Yeah, that's easy. That's an easy one. I blog weekly on ecosophia.net. That's ecosophia.net. I also have a Dreamwidth journal at ecosophia.dreamwidth.org. And those are my two main. I don't do most social media, but those two I'm on fairly regularly. And other than that, your favorite full-service bookstore or bookshop.org, which is worth your while, will happily sell you any of my books that interest you. And hey, they're out there and waiting.
One last question before we go, John. What was the genesis of the name Ecosophia?
Back in the days of the Archdruid Report, we were doing a lot of talk about ecology, which is the eco is oikos in Greek, is the home, okay? The home is our planetary home, okay? So ecology is the logos of the home, the speech, the discussion, the description of our planetary home. We also had a lot of talk about ecotechnics, which is the technique, the sciences and technologies that we need to live in balance with nature. There has not been enough discussion of ecosophia, the wisdom of the home, the wisdom of nature, what it is that allows us to guide our lives in a state of relative balance with the world of nature, rather than, just saying, well, we're going to do what we want and nature will just have to conform. Not a chance. Nature is a tough old broad. She has waved goodbye to millions of species. She can wave goodbye to ours. We need to clean up our act.
Wow, fantastic, John. So I want to thank you, John, again for spending a little over an hour with me and my audience today. And to our audience, thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed this podcast, be sure to go to the Institute for Sound Public Policy.org. Check out all of our other offerings, our columns, our videos. Also, there's a donate page. So hit that donate button if you want to, because that certainly helps us to bring more high quality content like this to you. Again, John, my wonderful audience, take care and thank you so much.